Welcome to the Backyard Professor podcast series. I'm coming at you live from my little log cabin here in the Rocky Mountains of lovely Idaho. I'm Kerry Schertz, the Backyard Professor. I'm continuing my podcast on the Min Horus figure in the Book of Abraham, Facsimile 2, the hypocephalus, and I'm discussing G.A. Wainwright's ideas of how Min is associated with Ammon and with Zeus. So without further ado, I'll get back to my discussion of the Min Horus figure.
Between Ammon to Zeus through the meteorite, because they are both storm gods and sky gods, and even solar gods. Wainwright, in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology for 1930, page 35, says Ammon of Thebes was a god of the air, a sky god, and his sacred object at Thebes was a meteorite. And he was intimately connected with this meteorite. He could have been actually derived from his far older neighbor Min, who was the thunderbolt god of Coptos, and that the omphalos of Zeus Ammon at the oasis of Ammonium, which is Siwa, had itself certain characteristics which associate it with the weather. This idea, this principle of the identification of Ammon with Zeus, the sky god, the thunder god of the Greeks, is extremely interesting. And he gives some evidences of that through the analysis of various meteorites which were found inscribed and drawn as Ammon, though they were in Minos. And they were very interestingly small statues dating back to 900 BC. He shows this on page 35. The object was deposited, some of the objects that have been found, in the holiest of spots. It shows that Ammon of Thebes and Zeus had already been identified together at a very early date, 900 BC. And, of course, Zeus was a sky god, and he doesn't need to demonstrate that. What I want to do is discuss a little bit of some historical and legendary aspects of Zeus as a sky god. First, Jane Harrison, in her Prolegomena to the Study of Greek Religion, pages 18, 19, 20, 21, discuss the implications of Zeus being pictured as a snake and being worshipped as a snake. Zeus Melikios. And her discussion isn't relevant to me at this point in time. What I want to do is just note that the figure in Facsimile 2, figure 7, which is presenting the wedge-eyed eye, is a legged snake figure in some hypocephali. So I think that might be relevant. Raphael Bataille, in his book, The Hebrew Goddess, this is the third enlarged edition, which was republished in 1990 on page 31, says the Roman Jupiter goes back to the Greek Zeus Pater, who in turn is derived from the Sanskrit Dias Piter. And expanding on that, Barbara Walker, the Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, this particular source is a rather huge source, Harper and Row, 1983. It's getting under her entry of Zeus. The Greek form of the Sanskrit Dias Piter, the Father Heaven, probably linked with the Babylonian myths of Zu, the storm bird, who incidentally was a thrower of thunderbolts, and the Romans called him Jupiter or Jove, the Jews called him Jehovah. Zeus was entitled Marnus, the virgin-born Zeus. He was also identified with a number of dying gods, such as Zeus Sabaoth, Zeus Zagreus, Zeus Sabaoth. Like Lucifer, he came down as rain or lightning to fertilize his mother, the earth. As a god of the fruit-defying bolt, he was known as Zeus Katabates, Zeus who descends. Again, echoes of our theme here with the principle of Min as the god of regeneration. Now, I found further references, interesting, some biblical parallels in Mark Smith's The Early History of God. This was published by Harper and Row. This is way back in, 1990. He notes on page 44, some scholars identify the Baal of Jezebel, and this is in the biblical record, with the Baal of Carmel, perhaps as his local manifestation at Mount Carmel. Like Baal Shamem, the Baal of Carmel appears to be a storm god. So here we go again with this theme. Min, Ammon, Zeus, and now some of the Baal characters in the biblical record are identified as storm gods. A 2nd century inscription from Carmel on a statue identifies the god of Carmel as Zeus Heliopolis. At Baalbek, Zeus Heliopolis had both solar and storm characteristics. Interestingly, Zeus is tied with Heliopolis. Heliopolis is mentioned more times on the rim of our facsimile number 2, which I will also describe. Heliopolis, the city of the sun, of course. Very Egyptian connection with the Greek at that point. At Baalbek, Zeus Heliopolis had both solar and storm characteristics. According to Macrobius in his Saturnalia, this Zeus Heliopolis was a solarized form of the Assyrian storm god, Adad. Macrobius in the Saturnalia identifies the cult of Zeus Heliopolis with a solarized worship of Jupiter. And here's the text that Smith reads. The Assyrians, too, in a city called Heliopolis, worship the sun with an elaborate ritual under the name of Heliopolis, calling him Zeus of Heliopolis. The statue of the god was brought from the Egyptian town, also called Heliopolis, when Sennamer, who was perhaps the same as Xenopus, was king of Egypt. The identification of this god with Jupiter and the sun is clear from the form of the ceremonial and from the appearance of the statue. In sum, the biblical evidence suggests that the Phoenician Baal of Ahab and Jezebel was a storm god. He says that on page 44. Bringing in a little bit of the biblical theme, which I will develop a little later also. In their very scholarly text, G.S. Kirk and J.E. Raven, the pre-Socratic philosophers out of the Cambridge University text series, it was published many times, reprinted almost a dozen times, the most recent reprint, 1981. On page 36, they are discussing the contents of the theogony of Hesiod and the predecessors, parallelisms between the Hesiod's account of the succession of oldest gods and the Hittite Kumarbi tablet of Hurrian origin, and its extant form dating from around the middle of the 2nd millennium B.C. In the Hittite version, the first king of heaven is Alalu, who is driven out by the storm god Anu. And they say this is related to the Sumerian An, which means the sky. Anu is deposed by the father of the developed gods Kumarbi, equivalent to Kronos, the father of the gods, who was also later deposed by, of course, Zeus. And they mention that. The Greek equivalents, obviously, the thunder and lightning god, Zeus, and who emasculates his father and becomes the sky god, the king of heaven. That's on page 36 of Kirk and Raven's text. Now, I found in a most interesting idea in relation to one of Joseph Smith's explanations in facsimile number 2 as well, in Hans Liesgang's The Mystery of the Serpent, in the book called The Mysteries, Papers from the Aranos Yearbooks, edited by Joseph Campbell. This is in the Bollingen series. It's volume 2, copyright 1955. He really has something interesting here to say. Page 199, in his Saturnalia, again going back to Macrobius's Saturnalia, and he's quoting 2 connected fragments of an Orphic hymn, and he says, he called the sun Phanes, from the Greek phos and phaneros, that is, from light and illumination, because it is visible to everyone and sees all. Dionysius, as the prophet himself says, from Dionysi, and Peripheristhai, because it moves in a circle. Whence Cleanthes